welcome. We are just kicking off the room, and if you're coming on replay, I just want to let you know that we have had some really good sessions on Clubhouse and on Startup Club. You can go to www.startup.club and you can check them out. We actually have had Jeffrey Moore. He wrote the book Inside the Tornado. He wrote the book Crossing the Chasm. It was just an incredible session. And if you haven't already seen it, just go to the website, www.startup.club, and check it out. It's an incredible discussion about the technology adoption curve and what entrepreneurs or startups need to do in the early stages of a technology adoption, including the chasm, the difficult period of the crossing, and also the tornado. John, welcome. We're going to give him a minute here to, and it's interesting because, and we have Verne Harnish just came on. If we can bring him on stage as well. I'm going to officially kick this off right now since we're ready to go, it looks like. So welcome to the Serial Entrepreneur Club, where we try to figure out what it is that serial entrepreneurs do over and over again to start, scale, exit, and repeat. And I'm actually happy to announce that I recently signed a publishing Verne with Forbes Advantage, and we're on track to launching the book this year, probably late this year, titled, guess what? Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, where we try to crack the code of serial entrepreneurs and what they do to continue to have success on every one of their ventures. There's four key areas for every business to succeed: people, money, you have to have a great story, and you need to have systems to scale. And trust me, I've used Verne's systems, and we do today on paw.com to help us scale our businesses. And I'm telling you, it's incredible. Absolutely incredible. But I do think one of the biggest challenges that startups face is raising money. It is daunting. We often talk a lot about, in this session or in this club, Startup Club, we talk about crowdfunding and venture capital, and we spend an enormous amount of time talking about those two areas. But we don't often talk about using your customers to fund your business. And I think that's why it's going to be very interesting today. We're lucky to have John Mullins and Verne Harnish on Clubhouse. Very cool. If someone could pull Verne up, that would be great.
Colin, you have to mod us.
Oh, okay. So I'm begging people to do their job here, and they're not doing it because I'm not doing my job. Isn't that always the case? There we
That's how
go.
it works, Colin.
Yeah, it is. Verne, I'm just going to start. Verne Harnish, founder of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, best-selling author of Scaling Up. And this is the second or third time he's come on to this particular show that we run every Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern. And I can tell you about paw.com, Verne. We've been on the Inc. 5000 now for 3 years, and we follow your systems. So I do believe your systems have had a big impact on me personally, but also on the companies that I'm involved with.
Colin, honored and so helpful that the tools have been helpful to you. But I'm excited to get over to John because, as you said it, funding a company is often the difficult part. And I see so many folks give away so much equity early on. One of the couple of the early guys that adopted our system, Scott and Mike with Atlassian. I remember when they only had 50 employees. 2005, they'd been in business for about 24 months. They came to our Sydney workshop and began to put all this stuff in place. Let's speed forward today, something north of 100 billion in market cap. And those two guys still own 72% of the company. They didn't give it all away along the way. And a big part of it was they got the customers to really fund their growth. Dave Rogan-Mosier did something similar when he launched out of Austin, his company Proof. He went ahead and put up a webinar. We're talking about a year out from even having a product. And they invited a bunch of potential customers. They ended up with about 200, they said on the webinar. And they said, look, any of you that are willing to prepay for slideware, we'll have a product in a year. But if you're willing to prepay, you'll get a 50% discount the rest of your life. And they had a big chunk of customers give them that startup funding that they needed. But John's the expert in this. And so I'd love to turn it over to him.
Absolutely. And actually, I was going to do the intro, but I think you've pretty much done it. And Jeff's going to be our chief mod today. John, can you just kick it off and tell us, is it really possible to get your customers to help fund your business?
John, go ahead and unmute yourself. Tap that little microphone, and there you go.
Thank you. It's not only possible, Colin, but actually it's the way that the vast majority of new companies do it. It's just not talked about because the VCs and that whole ecosystem that's been created today, accelerators and all that stuff, I know you guys have one. It's all built about raising capital and diluting equity. But if you look at the Inc. 5000 list that you guys with paw.com are on and look and see how many of those companies have raised any outside capital, what you find? Fewer than 10% of them will have done. So where did they get their money? They get their money from customers. And it's just not been talked about. And that's why I wrote the book, so we could bring this set of principles into the light of day.
That sounds great, John. Have you seen things change in more recent years in terms of the ability for companies to fund through their customers, given the advent of Kickstarter and crowdfunding campaigns and things like that? Or was it always possible or always?
Well, I didn't say it was easy, did I? It's not easy. Like the stories Verne just told, you can't bring 200 customers to a webinar and say, I'd like you to pay me now for something I'm going to give you in a year, unless that something is pretty darn compelling and unless it's something that they really need and can't get otherwise. So it's not easy. You've got to have a compelling offer to the customer, and it's got to solve a really compelling problem that that customer has. But if you've got a compelling problem and a customer knows they have that problem and they'd like to solve it, and you're the guy who can solve it best, they'll pay you, and they'll pay you in advance. So that's the fundamentals, and it's we have some new mechanisms today to do it. All the crowdfunding platforms are like that, right? You're getting money in advance on a crowdfunding platform, and you're promising of a product or a service tomorrow. But really, the fundamentals go much more widely. There are 5 ways to do it, as I talk about in the book.
Yeah, and we hope that we'll dig into those 5 ways. And we have a number of people up on the stage. So if you have a question for John about customer funding, feel free to flash your mic or dive right in popcorn style. And if there's no questions yet, John, maybe you can walk us through those 5 steps.
Sure. What's common about all of them is that the customer is really at the center of them. And of course, if you put the customer at the center of your business, that's likely to take you a long way because at the end of the day, if you satisfy customers, they're going to keep coming back. So the most fundamental and most straightforward of the models, the 5 models, is what I call pay in advance. And it's what Michael Dell did when he started Dell Computer from his dorm room at the University of Texas. He was 19 years old and he went to small companies, lawyers' offices, stuff like that, and said, you guys could go to a computer store to get a computer, but they can't speak English there. I can give you exactly the computer that you need, exactly designed to the needs you have in your business. And you just have to pay me today, and I'll have that computer for you in a week or 10 days or whatever it was. And that's how Michael Dell funded the business. He got paid in advance. It is not rocket science. In fact, most service businesses are paid at least partly in advance, right? So it's been around forever. It's not new. But again, people don't talk about it very much. The second model is subscription models. So we all subscribe to stuff, Netflix, the Wall Street Journal, whatever. And when do we pay for it? We pay for it up front, right? And then whoever the provider is, Netflix or a publication or whatever, delivers that over time. But meanwhile, they've got our money in the bank and they can use that money to further develop and grow the business. The third model is what I call scarcity models. It's what Zara does. I expect most listeners here will have been in a Zara store, and those who are regular Zara customers know that if you see a fashion item that you like in the store, you better buy it today because it's going to be gone. They don't buy boatloads of merchandise in any given style. They strictly limit the quantity and the time for which that style is available. And they've trained their customers to buy that way. So the result is Zara can turn its inventory 12 times a year, where Gap, where I used to work, turns its inventory 4 times a year. Guess what? Zara has our money, their customers' money when we buy the garment, but they don't pay the supplier, the person who made that garment, for 60 days. So again, you're getting the customer's money first, and you can do that to grow the business. Then there's what I call service to product models, where you start with a services business, and at some point you realize that the services are starting to look a lot alike from one customer to another. That's what happened that really created the value at Microsoft. Bill Gates and Paul Allen were writing operating systems for all the early PC makers. And pretty soon, after writing them one after another, they said, well, this stuff all looks the same. Why don't we write one? We'll call it MS-DOS, and we'll ship it in a shrink wrap box, or we'll download it with the PC. And they turned that customized, tailored, one at a time service business into a product business. And that's when the value of Microsoft really took off. And then finally, there are matchmaker models, marketplace models, platform models, lots of names for them. It's what Airbnb and Uber and eBay and the likes all do. They never own or touch what is bought and sold. They're just the middleman that brings together buyer and seller. And if you're just a middleman, you don't need a lot of capital to get that business started. You might max out a credit card or two, as the Airbnb guys did, but basically you can start a business like that with no capital because you don't own anything. And that's the fifth model. So
And
those are the 5 ways you can do.
it's funny that Zillow decided we're going to try to own the properties, and they went into that and very quickly realized they had a
Oops.
mess on their hands. Exactly, I had to pull out. So
Yeah.
that's very instructive. That's a good point to know what you're good at. I remember back in the 90s when we did an ISP, internet service provider, on the information superhighway. That's what we called it back then. We would actually charge annual pricing for our membership versus just monthly. So we had 2 options. And that annual pricing really did help us fund our business. So it is interesting how you can simply choose a pricing model and it can make a difference. Have you seen that at all?
Yes. In fact, the master of that is Costco. We all shop at Costco these days. And oddly enough, we somehow have been convinced that it's worth $50 for the privilege of shopping in the store. So we pay $50 in advance. That entitles us to go to Costco. And Costco is happy to have our money in advance, and they can use that money to not only grow the business, open more stores, but also because that money adds up to 2/3 of operating profit year in, year out. Amazing. 2/3 of their operating profit is what you and I pay $50 at a time to shop there. They can basically run the retailing business on no margins. How the hell are you going to compete with that if you're Target or Sears that's gone bust, Kmart's gone bust? It's unbelievable. And it's because they get our money up front.
That's amazing, John. I was thinking about you today in the session, reading about Amazon and thinking about their Prime membership. I'm sure most of us have read the news or raising the rates, etc.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I was just flabbergasted, I have to tell you. And it reminded me of your teachings that they have 172 million Prime members. So I'm curious from your point of view, if we're a small company and you've been very articulate telling us like you have to offer something, what would you suggest like to folks that are here in the audience? Maybe we're a little e-commerce company, like maybe we can't offer Prime Video or whatnot. In your research, is it better to offer a perpetual discount, or is it better to offer like first looks at products? I'm curious about some of the best practices for some of us smaller e-commerce companies. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So if you do the math on those numbers that you just talked about for Amazon, roughly $100 a piece times whatever you said, 172 million customers. That's 17 billion of revenue just from Prime, right? And of course, Amazon didn't used to have that revenue. They used to sell books one at a time and have us buy and pay for shipping one at a time. And they said, gee, we could get people to effectively subscribe to the shipping. That's what we do when we do Prime. We're subscribing to the shipping and we get the shipping paid in advance. Well, Amazon's got our money. And because we can get stuff shipped, Amazon has discovered we buy more. It's easier just to buy even a small item on Amazon than to go to the store since it's going to be shipped for free. So the key for a small e-commerce company like you're talking about is to think about, okay, what have I got that customers would like to have on a regular basis. For example, in a subscription model. So for Amazon, it was free shipping, and then they decided we could throw in some digital content, movies, and some other things too. And that made it even more appealing. What you've got to do as a small company is figure out, what have I got here that's maybe perishable, or that's going to go away if the customers don't get it every month or every whatever the interval is, and get them to subscribe to that, and then you have their money up front. So the subscription model that Amazon did with Prime is the model that I think you want to look at, but you have to look at your own business and say, okay, what have I got here that people would subscribe to? And I have to tell you, there've been some crazy ideas, right? There was a business called Man Packs, and guys could subscribe to free underwear, not free, but underwear every month. You get new underwear every month. I don't know about I don't need new underwear every month. So there's some pretty crazy ideas. You've got to come up with something that the customers
No,
Yeah.
no,
want.
Jeff and I signed up to that. We signed up to Heine.club, and it was underwear every month. So we're guilty of it
Absolutely.
and
You know, it
and
does
how
it does
long did
wear
you
out after a while.
and how long did you stay signed up?
until they went bankrupt.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
John, it's interesting. When you think about the path that many startups take, oftentimes a company will raise money first, give up that equity before they fully figured out what their business model is and how they're going to monetize the business. And it
Yeah.
seems to me that they're leaving equity on the table, so to speak, when they do that, because based on what you've said, it seems like it would behoove a startup to look at these 5 areas you laid out and see if one of them fits their business model and means that they can leverage their customer base to raise money and maybe not need to give up as much equity. So this should happen early.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly what you have to do. Because if you raise more money before you've proven to yourself, really, that your idea is going to work. As entrepreneurs, we're all optimists. We think it's going to work. But the data says that most of the time it doesn't work, right? Plan A, most of the time, doesn't work. That's why Randy Commissar and I wrote a book called Getting to Plan B several years ago. Another story for another time. But plan A probably isn't going to work. But if you've raised money on a pitch for plan A, what is the investor who gave you that money going to ask you to do? They're going to ask you to flawlessly implement plan A, right? And then when you discover that plan A isn't quite right and you've burned his money, and you go back and say, wait a second, I've learned some things here. I want you to give me some more money because I already burned the old money. That's a tough conversation to have. You're much better off spending time with customers, getting to understand them deeply, find a real compelling problem they have, and get them to pay you for it. And then once you've proven you've got some customer traction and the business is working, maybe then you decide to go raise money, or maybe like Michael Dell, you never may raise money because the customers are funding it all away. But at least when you go raise money, having traction, you're going to be in a very different position with your prospective investor. Mark Zuckerberg had a very viable business already running and underway with lots of subscribers before he ever took his first dollar. And because people were banging on the door, the big VCs banging on the door to get into the deal, he could set the term. If you're going to raise money off a pitch deck and you don't have any traction yet, guess who's going to set the term? It's going to invest the investor.
One thing that's striking me, John, I'm just going to say, and you can tell me I'm wrong, but it's really also you're benefiting from the capital infusion, but these models that you're describing, the company also benefits because they're also building and acquiring a loyal customer. So I would think that's a win-win. That's awesome.
It's a huge win. And at the end of the day, Peter Drucker, the most important management thinker of the 20th century, said if you don't have
Love
any
him.
customers, guess what? You don't have a business either. Now, for a long time, Twitter tried to prove them wrong, right? Twitter never had any paying customers until relatively recently. But they built a large base of users, and ultimately they found a way to monetize that. But for most companies, if you don't have a customer who's going to come back and pay you again tomorrow, you're going to have a really tough road. So this is a much sounder basis for building a startup than going out with a pitch deck, trying to raise some money, and then hope and pray.
I think the other thing that's interesting, John, is let's not forget what they call crowdfunding sites, but they're not. They're really pre-sale sites. It's an
Effectively.
opportunity. I think of the father and son team, the Andersons, down in Australia, who saw this issue. People really were challenged with wanting to raise their own honey, harvest their own honey in their backyard. We know honey's better if it's local. And so they created a solution called the Flow. And they needed to raise like $70,000. And the old way is friends, families, and fools. And instead, they went up on the equivalent of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, which is the
Mhm.
international site, and they pre-sold $250,000 in 15 minutes. They hit their million mark at the third hour. Usually, it takes longer than 3 hours to become a member of EO or qualify for EO. They doubled revenue in the next 11 hours, and 30 days later, when the dust settled, they had pre-sold over $12 million worth of their $600 device. By the way, they delivered on all of them. And they launched Flow 2, raised another 13 million. And again, they didn't raise it, they pre-sold it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can get into the details of how they did that. The power of using an influencer list. It was very much the same thing that Proof did, Dave Rogan Mosier did, something that we recommend, but they got the right influencers to begin talking about their product before the launch. And they calculated that they generated about 3 million. They were able to reach about 3 million folks that were interested, that were rabid about wanting to have their own honey in their backyard. And that's what drove those pre-sales. So you do need marketing. And that's a critical component here to this process.
Yep. And doing a successful campaign is not trivial. You need a demo and you need a video and you need to plan on having probably a third of the target sum already in your pocket so that you can roll those early people out and build momentum. And you got to use influencers and all that. It's not a trivial thing to do, but it's a much more sensible approach to take than the VC route.
Yeah. The other one that I think is interesting, it's a little known law that's on the books of all of the states in the US. And because the security and exchange law is if you have more than 35 investors, you've got to go public. But that is an onerous process. But if you only are going, if you're only in one state and you're only going to sell to people initially in that state, it's a single piece of paper. It's what Ben and Jerry's used. I forget the number of Vermonters who bought shares of the company,
Yep.
and they were the customers. And brew pubs have used this. There's nothing better than to say, "Hey, I'm an owner of the pub that I want to take all my friends to."
Exactly.
And I know it's a little bit of giving up some equity, but it's another kind of crowdfunding approach that you're really appealing to your customers who want to feel like they've got a sense of ownership within the organization.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, it's funny because we're looking at that for paw.com. Reg A Plus allows you to raise money with non-sophisticated investors. So we could literally raise, money from thousands of our customers. So we're having discussions internally here about this at the company. And we could raise, I think it's up to $20 million, or I don't know exactly have the limits of the regulation, but we can raise a substantial amount of money using Reg A Plus and crowdfunding. And there are crowdfunding platforms. And it's just interesting because we've never thought about soliciting for securities to our customers, which is it can be good. It can also be scary. It's obviously you have to have your legal documents done correctly here. But this is something that is relatively new. And with Reg CF crowdfunding, you're seeing a lot of opportunities for businesses. Just this whole concept, though, of using your customers to raise equity, I think it's a good idea. I've never actually done that other than IPOs. I've done two public companies, but it's just interesting to see if that we could actually pull something like that off with paw.com.
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility, Colin. My argument, though, is that if you can sell a product or a service, you're better off because then you're not giving away that equity. One of my former students wanted to open a pizza business in London, and he did what was at the time the largest crowdfunding round that had ever been raised in London to open his store. But one of the downsides he discovered is he now had all these shareholders who were self-acknowledged experts at the pizza business, right? We're all experts on pizza. We know what good pizza is, but we're all different. And he was getting way more unsolicited help than he actually wanted to manage as a result of having raised the money that way. Yeah, he got the money, but it was a pain in the neck to have to deal with all those shareholders.
And John, I want to add, and Colin, that we've got a lot of focus here on startup, and this is the Startup Club. But as you scale, growth sucks cash. And I think of David Rich, he was selling to large Fortune 500 companies, and a lot of us want them as our customers. And Neil Rackham's research found that those companies are surprised that small businesses don't ask for all the money that they're going to possibly spend with them that year up front. And so David was providing mystery shopping services for the top retailers. And these retailers were paying like in 120 days, 150 days, and it was crushing him. So he took this advice and he went and talked to them. And the one thing you have to realize if you sell to large companies is you're not selling to the CEO, you're selling to some VP of this, that, or the other thing. And they live in fear of one thing their entire year, and that is losing their budget. So they've been given a budget, and if it's not spent and out the door, sometime in the middle of the year, somebody could come along with a different set of priorities and grab the budget. So David went to the vice presidents of this, that, and the other thing that he was selling to that cared about the mystery shopping he was doing. Maybe other vice presidents wouldn't. And he said, look, why don't you keep your budget safe with me? Here's what you're going to spend on 4 campaigns for the year. Just give all the money to me up front. I'll keep it safe in the bank for you. And then he had to do some horse trading. So rather than the 2% net 10 kind of stuff, and then they still take the discount and pay you in 120 years days, he said, all right, there's typical campaign 150,000. We've got a special report to compare your data against your competitors for 10. Let's do this. We'll horse trade it. I'll give you that report, which for David was like a push of a button, in exchange for you paying for this whole set of campaigns in advance. And you have to realize that in large companies, they're bonused on the P&L, not on the balance sheet. So most of these big companies are flush with cash. So I was with a startup I'm funding to the big pharma, and I said, look, don't go out and raise the 6 million. The standard campaign is going to be 2. You've got something, to John's point, they really want. Go out and say, look, we only have space for 3 of you. Whoever's willing to put up the funds ahead is going to get first shot at this. And I think what they have is compelling enough. So that's what they're out doing. I'll let you know, John, if it turns out. But I'm pretty sure these big pharma are flush with billions right now.
Mm.
And so horse trade on the P&L side in order to get their cash. And David didn't get all the companies customers, but he got about 50% of them who
That's all
paid
you
him
need.
a year in advance, and that's all he needed.
Yep, that's all you need. You don't have to get it from everybody.
Ed,
John,
you
I
had a
was
question,
wondering.
I think. Ed, sorry.
Oh, I just was to add to the theme of the room is the bigger theme that you've been touching upon, John, is that a lot of startups assume they have to go get angel or venture capital money. But if instead you start with your focus on customer and build it without outside equity, your business proposition, your business model is probably way stronger than you might discover. You don't need outside equity capital, or if you do at that time, you discover it's much easier because you've already proven the model. You have a very good customer product fit, and the and then the example you used with Dell, just wanted to underline that as well, because not only were they collecting the credit card payment before they started building it, then with that customer demand, they were able to work out great terms with their suppliers. So they had a massive negative cost of negative cash flow, where they would have all the money in the bank months before they had to pay their suppliers in many cases. That
Yeah,
becomes such a
exactly.
powerful engine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I call negative cash flow nirvana, where you're getting the money from your customer long before you have to pay your suppliers. And then you use that money to grow the business. And then you grow it some more and you use that money to pay the suppliers, and it becomes a nice cycle.
Yeah, it's such an amazing Christian returns feedback loop, and then you combine that with what Verne was saying too. And my impression, like Oracle was basically doing that for probably the first few years. Of essentially, the user lose at end of the year budgets. They were saying, "Hey, you should buy some database stuff," and they were selling database futures. And I've seen so many other businesses do that successfully. A friend who was running a pretty large ISP, end of year, they would do the same thing. Hey, go ahead and prepay for the following year so you don't lose it from your budget. And so they were working on amazing cash flow. So yeah, there's many different ways of building a business without outside equity capital. And thanks for starting to highlight some of those, because that really gets a better alignment with the core business model and the core customer need.
Yeah,
Hey,
exactly.
John, why don't you mention? I still think it's one of the most important articles for every entrepreneur to read, and that's the one that you and the late Neil Churchill wrote.
Yeah, boy, that's almost 20 years ago now. We wrote that article, believe it or not, Vern. It's an article called "How Fast Can Your Company Afford to Grow?" And you can buy it from the Harvard Business Review website. But what it enables you to do is look at your working capital characteristics, how many days of receivables and how many days of payables and how many days of inventory if you've got inventory and so on. And you can put them into a model and you can figure out the rate at which you can grow without having to go to a bank or an outside investor. And then what you can do is you can play with those levers and say, gee, I'm paying my suppliers in 30 days maybe. If I could pay them in 45 days, what would that do to my self-financeable growth rate? It would jack it up and you can figure out exactly how much. And that article, Vern, as you well know, has become a Bible for how you think about working capital in a way that enables you to grow your business with the cash you got rather than always just assume you got to go get cash from an ornery banker or a VC.
Yeah, it was John. It was a breakthrough article. How fast can your company grow? You've set the tone with the cash conversion cycle, and I'm just blown away by how many entrepreneurs don't know what their cash conversion cycle is. It's one of the first things that Tom Meredith taught Michael Dell when Michael scaled up and got in trouble. Actually, ran out of cash the first time. That's when he got religion, and Tom said, "Hey, Michael, here's your problem," and that's what he helped him get it fixed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really critical. And during COVID last year, I was doing a bunch of workshops because a lot of companies were struggling with cash, as we know. And I was doing a lot of workshops on the ideas that are in that article and getting entrepreneurs to think about not only their P&L, which all of them think about, but also a line by line analysis of that P&L. And then more importantly, take a look at the balance sheet, because what many entrepreneurs don't realize is cash doesn't sit on the P&L, it's on the balance sheet. And if you don't understand your balance sheet, you're going to miss some tricks. And it was really interesting for me to run these little workshops on Zoom, a whole bunch of them over the last year. And I'd ask people, so there are 5 tools I was teaching. I'd ask people, how many of you use this tool or one like it? And most of them didn't use any of them, or maybe they only used 1 or 2 that dealt with a P&L, but nothing on the balance sheet. It blows my mind that that we're in that place today, but we are.
This is like a master class listening to Vern and John go back and forth like this. Just to refresh the room real quick, we're here at the Serial Entrepreneur Hour on Startup Club with John Mullins and Verne Harnish talking about how you can fund your startup through your customers. And this has been a great discussion. Sharon, I know you had a question. I saw you flashing.
Yeah, John, I was wondering what you thought about the Starbucks model. The Starbucks app has been rumored to have probably $1.2 billion in their app at any given time. And that's more than some banks are funded, frankly. And it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting process because loyal customers use reward apps like the Starbucks apps, probably 50% more than other apps. And so that's a really important funding model for them, but it also drives digital engagement and relationship engagement for them. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, it's helpful in two ways, as you've just said, Sharon. It's helpful for the cash because Starbucks has that cash and they can use it until the customer needs it. Secondly, it's helpful in building loyalty with that customer because if the customer's driving around in his car and needs an espresso and he's got money in his Starbucks app, he's not going to go to a Caribou or another place. He's going to go to Starbucks. So it has a double whammy, really, a really beneficial hit for Starbucks to be able to do that. It reminds me of the old days. We don't use traveler's checks anymore, and maybe I'm showing my age, but when I was young, if you took a vacation, you would buy traveler's checks to keep your money safe while you were on your vacation. So you'd go to your local bank and you'd say, "Oh, I need $500 worth of traveler's checks," and you'd give the bank $500, and they'd give you these things called traveler's checks and you'd spend them over time, but you probably wouldn't spend them all. So you'd put them in a drawer and use them on your next vacation. That might be a year later. Even better, even better for the issuer of those checks, you might lose them and forget where you put them in the drawer, and you might never redeem them. So all that cash up front is what made American Express what it is today. That's how American Express got its start. Now traveler's checks are pretty much gone, but the principle of getting customers to give you some money up front and have it sit there ready for you to use, whether it's Amazon Prime or a Starbucks app or traveler's checks in the old days. That's the principle that Vern and I are talking about.
Let me add to that, John. I want a lot of folks think, hey, I've got to be as big as Starbucks or Amex to do this. But
No.
when I was building my company in Ashburn, Virginia, we have some beautiful bike trails there. And there was a general store, a single general store. But they knew that none of us wanted to carry around our wallets. Your leather's going to get all nasty because you're sweating and the like, and you don't really want to particularly have cash. So this single little general store had a card, and you'd put $100 on it. And that's what you'd put in the back of your jersey. And you could pull that out and get the drinks or whatever it is you needed as you were riding around. We've really encouraged that as for retail stores, gift cards. We really think it's critical to be pushing those. And the research there is real clear. Folks will spend then another 40% more than the value of the gift card. So if you give somebody a $100 gift card, they're likely to come in and spend 140, and 40% of them aren't ever total values ever used. And so that's free cash. Now it depends on, there's some state rules where you might have to refund that, but a buddy of mine actually spun up a company that then handled those for other firms so they could get that money back and not give it to the state. So there's some details there around gift cards, but small retailers and others can do this. You don't have to be Amazon.
Good point,
Yeah,
Vern.
that's great. Sharon, you had a follow up?
Oh, I was just thinking that for Vern touched on it a bit, but I was wondering what John's also thoughts were about. Obviously, startups are usually cash strapped, creating another app or something that gives them a loyalty program. Do you have any other suggestions for startups where they might be able to institute this similar to the Starbucks model and do it perhaps with less capital than a Starbucks or a big company putting out gift cards?
Sharon, as I said, there are 5 ways, and it depends on the kind of business you're trying to build. You can very simply get people to pay you in advance, which is what Prime does and what the Starbucks card does. Or you can build a matchmaker business and say, I'm going to bring together people who want taxi rides with people who have cars. And I'm not going to own any cars, but I'm going to make it easy for them to find each other. And that's not like they're paying you in advance, they're paying each other, and you're getting a slice of that transaction, but you don't need cash if you play your cards right to get that kind of business started. Or you do a subscription and you get somebody to say, okay, you want this good or service I'm going to give you. A lot of people now buy organic vegetables delivered to their door every week, and that's a subscription service, and you get them to pay you upfront for the first 3 months. You're off and running. So it depends, Sharon, I think, on the kind of business you want to build to know which of these 5 tools is the best one to use. But one of them will work for most kinds of businesses.
And Sharon, let me talk a little bit about tech companies because they're the ones that have been habitually just, it's the way you do it. You got to go out and raise a bunch of funds. But the old way when you would build software is, or an app or a piece of technology, is you would actually sign up your first customer. You would find a major Fortune 500 company that has a big problem, and you land a contract to create the custom solution for that. And they're essentially then paying for your development. They're going to ask for some agreement to get this, is going to hopefully give them some kind of a leg up on their competition. But then at some point, you can go to them and say, hey, I'd like to now generalize this and take it out to the marketplace. And that's how you get those first apps built. That's what this company who's building a solution for big pharma is doing. And they've got a track record in the industry and the like, so they're trusted. Back to John's point, folks have to really believe you've got some value, but they don't have the solution, but they have the track record for getting it. And they're going to those big pharma relationships to say, hey, let's get the 6 million there in order then to build this solution out from 3 customers of all those that they could be there, instead of going out. And Julie doesn't want to raise the funds anyway. It's just hard work. It's almost easier to sell the customer than it is an investor.
That's great, Vern. A really great suggestion to get a big client to ultimately pay for your development, and then you can repurpose that for other customers. We've got a few people who've been very patient up on stage, and I want to make sure we try to give them all a chance to ask their questions. So let's go to Anthony next. Anthony, do you have a question for John or Vern? Okay, Anthony, if you're there, unmute yourself. Otherwise, oh, there you
Oh,
are.
yeah. There we go. Hey, John, thank you for coming on here, man. This is really awesome to just get to learn from you. My question is, just as you're on Clubhouse right now, do you think brands need to start developing a social audio only strategy when it comes to marketing and growing?
I think we've seen the power of social media broadly, and there continue to be new kinds of applications developed across the social media space, and certainly audio is one of those. The growth of the whole podcast world, for example, is off the charts. I wouldn't tell you that every single business needs to do that. It depends on whether you're building a consumer business or a B2B business and who your target market is. But often having an audio strategy and taking advantage of things like this kind of programming can be very powerful, very effective, and not very costly.
And you don't have to be good looking on
Yeah,
this
right.
audio strategy stuff. So
And I wonder if Clubhouse, with the big audience that they have, I wonder, John, how much thought they're giving currently to these 5 areas and figuring out, now that they have this big base of customers, how could they fund their business? Although they've got a lot of funds from traditional VCs, but maybe they've given up more equity than they probably want to at this point. They should be looking at their customers too.
I think one of the things that's happening as this set of ideas becomes more widespread. So I've also put the book essentially into MOOC form. So there's a MOOC on Coursera called Start or Grow Your Business Without VC. And 70,000 people have taken that course now. What's happening, I think, is people in companies of any size are saying, holy cow, this doesn't have to be about startups. This can be about my business today. I can go to my customers. Vern just told the story of Dave Rich. He went to his current customers and said, how about we have different kind of payment terms? I'll give you something for that, and you give me payment up front. So I think we're seeing increasingly this set of ideas being used not to start businesses, but to scale them and to put growth into a whole new gear. And Vern knows I'm going to run an online course with the Gazelles guys this summer, and we're going to apply these ideas to scale ups rather than startups. It's a really compelling opportunity.
That's a
yeah,
great point. It's
yeah,
not just
John,
develop.
we love the number of customers that have really taken on to your London Business School course.
Yeah, so scaling, leveraging your customers to fund the scaling of your business is just as valuable as using it to start your business. Great point. Austin, did you have a question for John or Vern?
If we're talking about funding a startup, I was thinking maybe everybody's doing their coins. So if you can have this coin or that coin, why wouldn't you just have like your own coin for your brand?
Austin, I'm not sure I can answer you on that one. Verne may know a bit more about that world than I do, but I have not studied it and I don't own any coins, so I'm not the right guy to help you with that question. Verne, do you bring anything to that?
Invested in a couple of big funds in that space, but I am way too old, John, to understand it. So I've got I'll call him a kid. He just turned 30, but Greg Snow's my go-to guy on those kind of questions. So I have no idea.
No.
Yeah, one thing I will say is that even if you're trying to raise money through crypto, it's important to understand that you need to follow the Securities and Exchange Commission rules. There's a show that we do every week on Startup Club with Jenny. If you check it, if you go to www.startup.club, every week she runs a show. She dedicates the entire show to that question and raising money. And she's a lawyer out of California. She's absolutely amazing. So I'd encourage you to join that show or catch one of the replays.
Cool.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Colin. Let's go to Ryan next. Ryan, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Great room. I've never been in a room that talks about creating cash from your customers and traveler's checks in the same area. So you guys absolutely crushed it there. So yeah, my question is, you mentioned creating cash from us as a services business, and you mentioned Microsoft, which I thought was great. So basically what I do is I help companies create cash, bootstrap companies, SaaS companies, startups, through landing enterprise customers. So you really caught my attention because that's a different angle that I didn't really think super deep on. But so can you just go a little bit deeper on that and like the methods and the tactical execution of how to go forward with that if you're providing services for?
Typically, with any service, you're going to ask for some money up front. If I want to get my kitchen remodeled and I hire a designer to work on that, he or she is going to ask for a down payment before she does any work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because with a service, once the service is delivered, you can't really take it back. It's not
Right.
like a product where you could get it back. If the car doesn't work, you could get the car back. But with a service, you can't. So every service, literally every service, can be sold on some of the money or all of the money upfront basis. It's just the way services are work and it's the way customers expect to pay for them, frankly. So it's easier in a service business to do because it doesn't run counter to any of our habits. We expect to
Mm-hmm.
pay something upfront for service.
Okay, yeah, that's the way I do it now. I was just wondering if there's any other tricks to like pre-fund software or anything like that. Not tricks, but strategic ways that you go about it if you haven't built it yet. Because I'm seeing patterns in what I do, just like you mentioned, of that you could productize. And so that's the route I was thinking. Do you have anything or ideas on what companies do to pre-fund the development? Is it what you're talking about, just prepay at like a 50% discount, or are there other ways in which you've seen
Uh,
work really well?
Let me add, John, on this. One of the things that Noam Wasserman found in his research is that intact teams who leave versus the solo entrepreneur scale further faster.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why if we've got some folks listening in here that are working for a major company, often the way you get birthed as an entrepreneur, you're inside that enterprise and you're frustrated by something. And you've suggested a solution and they're like pushing back. So you're like, all right, I'm going to leave and just do it. And I'm going to take two or three of my buddies because we're all frustrated as well. The most important thing for you to do is see if you can get a contract with your existing employer. Say, hey, we're going to leave. We're going to do this. We think this fixes a problem internally. Could you be our first customer? Because they know you and you know them. And it is about relationships when you're in that startup phase. And so that's often how you can get it launched as well.
yep,
Gotcha.
yep.
Okay.
But
All
the
right.
key is you got to have that customer. You got to find a customer and say, "Dear customer, I can solve this problem you've got, and here's how much money I need to get started." And I think one of the barriers is people say, "Gee, can I ask that question? Why would anybody do that?" Michael Dell was 19 years old when he started asking that question. Pay me in advance for a computer, right? If Michael Dell could do that at 19 years old, couldn't all of you guys do that at whatever stage you are in your careers? It's in part having the courage uh, to ask and having the conviction that what you're asking for is really good for the customer and it's unique enough. It's one of the key things Verne talks about. You can't sell a commodity this way, but if you've got something that's really special and the customer really needs it, they're going to pay you.
Absolutely, John. If you don't ask, you don't get, right? And the only way to know if you can fund your business through your customers is to ask them. So I love that. Pierre, you've been extremely patient. We're coming up close to the top of the hour, so I want to give you a chance to ask your question.
Great. Thank you for having me. And just want to also echo Ryan's earlier comment. This has been a great room. I haven't had a chance to listen to everything. I stepped in when it was mentioned about the white paper, how fast can your company grow? I'm going to definitely look for that. The question I want to ask is something a little more general. In all this suggestion about equity, my question is, would fraud also be a stronger temptation when these smaller companies are trying to use some of these investment tools? I like the point that was brought up about the pizza owner, that all of a sudden he had shareholders that were all of a sudden experts and putting their 2 cents in. That's friendly. But sometimes, even in business, you can get people who are trying to take control and do fraud in a way that maybe the common investor may not be paying attention or understanding. So, my question to John and Verne is that a stronger temptation now? And if so, what are the things that people can protect themselves from being the next Theranos? And thanks again for answering my question.
Vern, maybe you want to address that. I don't see a big fraud problem here, actually. Do you?
Oh, Vern is out there fighting fraud as we speak.
Yeah, if you're asking a customer to pay you $15,000 today so you can do some work that you're going to deliver in 90 days, they are not in a position to be fraudulent with you. They've given you the money. If there's any risk around it, it runs the other way, that you're a scammer and you're going to take the 15 grand and not deliver. So you've got to build trust. It becomes very important to do, and that's one of the things that you want to do throughout your career, right? You want to build trust with everybody you meet and build a network that says, that Pierre's a great guy, you can trust him. So that when you've got a proposition that you want somebody to pay for up front, you're going to have references that say, okay, yeah, you can trust Pierre, he's going to deliver. So I think the fraud risk, if there is any, runs the other way, not the way you were thinking about it.
Yeah, I apologize a little bit if I may have asked that question in a way that's backwards. Like I know of one company that tried to do a stock, but I guess, John, you actually answered my question in a way. They were trying to do it through equity as a stock, but they were going to their customers, just like you said, John. If a customer is paying for a service, they expect that service. With a stock, sometimes it's about performance, and I think the company that tried to do this was not letting people understand their performance issues and just became a fraudulent thing. So that's what I meant by that. And thank you.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Thank, Yeah, thank you, Pierre, for bringing that up. And John, yeah, trust is a critical point. And it's interesting too, because when you talked about leveraging your customers to scale your business, that's an instance where you may have already had the benefit of establishing trust because you're going to your existing customers who you've been doing business with. So they're probably more likely to invest in your future at that point by prepaying because they've already built that trust.
Great point.
Yeah. So I think we're at the top of the hour now. So I want to say this has been an amazing discussion, really valuable information from both John and Verne, and some great questions. We really appreciate it. I want to give John and Verne a chance to give any last remarks or last bits of advice. What should a startup be doing? Certainly looking at these 5 points, John, that you mentioned, matchmaker models, pay in advance models, subscription models, scarcity models, and service to product models. What's your last bit of advice to our listeners?
Let me go first because I want John to end. And that is just watch and learn and read everything John has taught and written. So he's the grandmaster. Nobody else has really tackled this topic like he has. So, John, thank you for taking the time to be on this and taking a break from skiing. You live out there in beautiful Colorado, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Vern, for the kind words. I'd say that the one piece of advice I'd say is look, make sure you're really solving a customer problem with what it is you want to sell. Don't try and sell something that everybody else is selling to. And number two, then have the courage to ask the person for whom you're solving that problem to pay you up front to do it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John and Verne, and everyone who asked questions, and everyone who's been in the audience listening today. This has been great. Colin, I'll hand it off back to you to close us out.
Yeah, it's just interesting. We're so obsessed with venture capital with crowdfunding. And the fact of the matter is, you lose large portions of your company. They often come with something called liquidation preference, which means they actually get paid before you do, and they don't take the risk you as an entrepreneur are taking. And yet we have this simple solution of raising money from your customers or selling them products to help support the growth of your business. And I just think this topic is something that we don't talk about enough, and really appreciate you coming on here, John, and thank you, Verne. I want to let you know that next Friday, 2 o'clock Eastern, we have TEDx speaker himself, John Wensvin, who runs the Alan Levan Center in Florida. And we have another lady who's coming on, who's the CEO of an incubator up in Canada. And the session is really going to be talking about it takes a village to build a startup, and should you locate your startup in an incubator. And that's happening next Friday, 2 o'clock Eastern. If you want to hear the replay for this, you can get that on the Clubhouse app, or you can go to www.startup.club. And we just launched podcast too. We're now on Apple and Spotify under the Serial Entrepreneur Club. But you can listen to, I think we have 35 episodes uploaded now, and we're trying to catch up and get all. I think we're about number 45 right now. But it's all available on whatever method you want to hear these solutions, because we really are trying to crack the code. Thank you very much, John. What a great session.
Thanks for having us, Colin.
Thanks, everyone. We hope to see you again for another edition of the Serial Entrepreneur Hour here at Startup Club. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, guys.